Welcome everyone, March 2022, and this is another event of the monthly Dev. And to be honest, I think this will be one of my favorite events because I've always loved Docker and DevOps stuff. So this will be a very interesting one for me. I see already a lot of people, too many people. So thank you for coming. And just let me remind you that this event is offered by daily.dev, which is a tool to stay updated as a developer. So it's like a tool from developers to developers. So I highly recommend to check that out. And what will we talk about today? We have three amazing speakers. We will go in order with Scott, Idan, and then Amir. I'll let them speak after one by one. So good luck everyone. And I think that we can get started because this will be very interesting. Usually we have 20-25 minutes for all the speakers, and we have a Q&A session at the end, about 5 or 10 minutes. And so feel free to make any questions to all the speakers. And yes, I think we can start. Just as a small sound check if you want just to say hi, and then I think that we can start.
Hello, glad to be here.
Yeah. Hello. Just say hi. Just say hi.
Hello.
We can start.
Hello.
Perfect. Okay. Nice. So hi, bye Idan and Amir. I'll stay with. Let me remove all of them. Okay. So the first speaker is not a common one. We can say you don't have the Docker CEO every day as a guest in an event. So. Thank you, Scott. We met in person in San Francisco. I already missed that. I also own you still a pizza and a beer. And since I am Italian, one day I'll pay my debt. So, Scott, how are you? And this will be a little bit different style with more conversational, and maybe there will be some slides at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Francesco, so excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and really looking forward to the conversation with you and your community. I see it's super active. And the other speakers. So appreciate the invitation.
Nice. So Scott, can you please introduce yourself? So someone in the audience, maybe they don't know you.
Sure.
And I really love your swag. I'm very envious, I can say.
Well, yeah, there's swag from conferences that we used to go to, but maybe with things opening up again, we'll start going back to conferences. So these are all from 8 years of Docker swag, DockerCon swag. No, happy to be here, Francesco. And so by just real quick introduction, I started as a developer way back when. My first computer was a Radio Shack TRS-80, and I learned to program BASIC on it. And this is early 80s, so I'm dating myself here. Learned Fortran, Pascal, C, Java along the way. Fast forward, I was working in product at Puppet Labs in 2013. And 3 months after Docker open sourced in March 2013, Docker started showing up with our customers at Puppet. And I was super intrigued because there was so much buzz and excitement around it. And Puppet, if folks recall, Puppet was trying to solve similar problems in terms of making environments consistent between servers and between the development environment and server environment, production environment. And I could see in the summer of 2013 that Docker was going to completely revolutionize that, completely going to change the world. And so that got me very, very excited. And within 6 months, February 2014, I was with the Docker team. At the time, there was about 20 of us. Most were kind of open source engineers, software developers. Solomon, of course, the founder of Docker, and then Ben Golub, who was the CEO at the time. Fast forward to today, I've had the privilege of being with Docker more than 8 years now, and eventually rose to CEO, which is really just the chief deckhand at Docker, working with a fantastic team of people and community members to keep the focus on developers going and keep shipping great products for developers. So very, very brief intro, Francesco, and again, excited to share what we've learned about community over the years at Docker and talk further on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see that when I joined Twitter, I started to be connected with basically all the people in Docker. So now I know many of them. Many of them are also my friends. For example, there's Michael. There's Michael that now works with you, and many people have already been on my YouTube channel. So one day, if we have time, I would like also to have you as a guest. This is a little bit shameless promotion, but okay. So what about the Docker team? So let's start with the Docker team. What do you think about that? Why does it work? Do you like that?
Yeah. So as you might expect, we recruit pretty heavily from other developer communities or developers who are using Docker in their own work, right? So they're using Docker to build applications for their companies, and they're excited about Docker, and then they join us to keep working on the product that they love. The other aspect is because we're now with COVID, we went 100% virtual first. So we are a fully distributed, fully virtual organization. We're able to recruit fantastic engineering talent around the globe, and that's been an eye opener that we've got great engineers in South America and south of Europe and Eastern Europe and all over the United States and Canada. And it's really fantastic to see that, community knows no geographic boundaries, right? And innovation knows no geographic boundaries, and talent knows no geographic boundaries. And so the fact that we're able to kind of keep growing the Docker team, we went from 60 some people November 2019 when we did the reset and the recapitalization to now we're over 150, and it's fully distributed, fully remote, and talent from around the world. And so that's been fantastic to see.
Nice, amazing, Scott. Yes. Okay, so what about the community? What is the Docker community? Because this is the title. So what is the Docker community? What do you do as a community? Because there are events. Where are you more active?
Well, this is in some sense the challenge, but also the benefit of Docker the brand, right? So Docker the brand, it's a product, it's a community, and it's also a company or a business, right? And so when you say Docker, the person saying Docker could mean any of those three things or all three of those, right? And so the Docker community is fantastic on so many dimensions. One is there's a hardcore group of folks inside the community, a segment of the community that really knows the Docker technology, the Docker container engine technology, and all the networking and storage and adjacent parts. And they are contributing to the Docker project itself. We have a very kind of active upstream project around the Docker engine, around BuildKit, around Compose, which are all kind of part of our tool set. And so that's a very appreciated and active group that helps us make the product better with their own ideas, their own contributions, their own innovations. Containerd is another aspect of that community. Then there's a community that is building content on top of the container infrastructure. So you have community members that are building container images and sharing them through Docker Hub. You have community members who are building Compose examples of their favorite application stacks and sharing that through awesome Compose. And so you see that community kind of contributing and giving back and sharing best practices there. And then third is a lot, and this is where a lot of the community members participate, is they help each other bootstrap with their particular application stack or their particular set of tools with Docker. And you see this kind of sharing of best practices and tips happening in Stack Overflow and our community forums, community Slack channels. And so that's kind of the broad community surface area, Francesco. And then within that, there's two sets of leaders that we're deeply appreciative of, and we'll talk about this if we get to the slides. We call them the Docker captains and the community leaders. And so the community leaders are those that are globally working around the world to kind of organize meetups and share their excitement with others in the Docker community locally. And so we have on the order of 50, 60 some local community organizers and they're spread around the world. Like there's 200 some countries of activity that we can see globally that are talking about Docker and using Docker and sharing best practices on Docker. And so those community leaders are part of organizing those local meetups or local meetups that are part of a virtual event like DockerCon, which we'll talk about in a second. And then we have Docker captains, of which Francesco, thank you. You are one. And those Docker captains are those that are not only helping the community leaders organize, but they're the ones that are really pushing the product aggressively into new spaces, new places that we can solve problems for developers. They're active out there talking about what Docker can do for developers for different stacks and different use cases and different problem sets. And frankly, the Docker captains are earliest source of product feedback into the product organization of where Docker can improve in terms of making better user experience, additional functionality to solve more use cases, different language stack supports. And so the captains, in some sense, are the superpower of the community that kind of drive and help the community leaders, which then kind of activate the millions of community members that are out there as well. So I'll pause there. It's a very rich community. We're very grateful and thankful and fortunate to have such an active community. And let me just say publicly, Francesco, thank you for being a part and joining that community as well.
No, to be honest, it's an honor. I think that I'll start celebrating the anniversary of me becoming a Docker captain. It will be soon, in a couple of months. So I don't know. I have basically another reason to celebrate. So it's never bad.
Awesome. Awesome.
Nice. So before I let you maybe present just a couple of slides. What do you think is an important key to create a successful community? Because creating a successful community, it's something that sounds easy, but I think it can also be super, super hard. So what do you think is the key to create a successful community?
Yeah, it is super hard. And we'll talk about helping a community be sustainable in the context of a product and a business in a minute. So let me park that. I think sustainability is really hard. And that's, I think, part of your label, right? When you say success means community persists, right? And it keeps going. I think another part of success, though, is having a product surface area or a product architecture that allows contributions from many different levels of community, right? So and we talked about a couple of these. So we welcome contributions to the Docker infrastructure. That's hardcore kind of Linux development work that is pretty high end, right? But community members can also contribute extensions to the product, which is much less about C groups and namespaces in the Linux kernel and much more about kind of additional functionality. Or community members can contribute content, whether it's awesome compose files or community images. And my point there is that to make a community successful, finding roles and opportunities for everyone to contribute, regardless of where they are in their journey as a developer, regardless of where they are technical expertise wise, and regardless of their interest area, right? Where can they contribute and provide value to others in the community and then get feedback on that contribution? That is really important to have a successful community. And I want to cite, so Docker's done work here, right, to make that give and take possible at all these different levels. I'll say another community, which I know many of the visitors or many of the participants are aware of, is Kubernetes community has done a fantastic job at this as well. There's a lot of different layers in that Kubernetes stack where different community members can participate and give and take and contribute. And so I point that out as another example of a successful product architecture that allows a community architecture to thrive and sustain and grow.
And I think this is a living proof of what a community is not just about thinking about just your community, but also
Correct.
the collaborations between communities. Communities at the end of the day are people. So the same person can be even in 2 or 3 or 10 communities. So it's also a matter of choice. And I like, to be honest, I love this mindset. There should not be competition between similar companies, and that's so. Okay, so Scott, what do you think if I jump off the stage for a while? So I'll read all the messages that we had in the meanwhile, so you can present maybe a couple of slides just to give an idea, and then we can close it. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll come back for
10 minutes.
Yeah, we'll come back for some Q&A. Good.
Yeah. Can I share your screen?
Yeah, there we go.
I just want to say that I really appreciate that they put the daily.dev logo on the slides. So
Absolutely.
It's all about small things, but I really appreciate that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I think that I'll go off and I'll be back in about 10 minutes when you'll be done. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It won't even be that long. Thank you, Francesco.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, everyone. I just want to thank you, Francesco, for the opportunity. I just want to share a couple of lessons learned and ways in which we think about sustainable community, sustainable product, and sustainable businesses at Docker. And hopefully this triggers additional conversation and questions. By no means perfect, but lessons learned in our 8-9 year journey as a company. First, just to level set the Docker developer community at a glance, here's some stats to share. We have 10 million registered Docker developers, all 100% for free. We got over 200 countries represented around the world throughout that community. And within those countries and the global setting, we have more than 160 meetup groups that are meeting regularly to talk about Docker, or meeting with other groups in different communities to talk about Docker. And then, as I referenced earlier, really community leadership is outside of Docker, the company, and really in the hands of what we call the Docker captains, who are our senior most ambassadors for Docker throughout the community, as well as community leaders who work with the local community and local organizers to bring together talks and best practices and help the community members on their own journey with Docker. So the sustainable Docker is, as I referenced at the top, is really a combination of community, product, and business. And I'll try to show how any one of these by itself isn't sufficient, and you need all three together. And so, of course, this is a developer discussion, and we're a developer-focused company, so it starts with a product, and that's at the top there. And you can see the product then is what we, of course, ship and provide to the community, but it's not a one-way street. So we have an open public roadmap on GitHub. We have early preview forums in our Docker community Slack channel. And so this is a way for us to share early ideas, whether it's in the roadmap or whether it's early releases of the product, and to hear community feedback in terms of what's working, what's not, what additional functionality do we need to add, where can we improve the user experience, where we can improve the performance. And so it really is a two-way street. And without that two-way street, like we're flying blind in terms of our product roadmap and our product direction, and where we need to invest further in the product. Then within the community, the vast majority of the community use, over 80% and millions of developers use Docker for free, which is exactly as intended. We want to help the community on their own cloud native journeys. And by providing zero economic friction, just start the product, use it for free, is a big impulse for that, is a big driver for that. However, there are developers in that community that are working for large organizations who have managers who want additional management tools or additional security or additional visibility into the fleet of containers and the fleet of Docker desktops that are out there. And so for them, there are paid additions to the Docker product that they subscribe to. And what that does for us as a business, then, we can see on the left there, that then allows us to pay the salaries of software developers, of our engineers, who then further invest in the product at the top. And so hopefully you can see kind of how all this sustains. Like if you took any one piece out, if you took the product out, like, what is the community going to use, and how is there going to be a useful tool out there for developers to build their applications? If you took the business out, like, hard for us to pay for engineers to build and contribute and keep moving the product forward. And of course, can't take the community out, because community is the users base that we're serving with our product. So again, high level, but hopefully that shares with you all participating here today how we think about how all these pieces fit together, and that they all are together kind of synergistic, to use a buzzword, that they all contribute to each other and contribute to the success of the community, success of the product, and success of the business. Just maybe a more specific example here. So Docker is available in 4 different plans: personal, pro, team, business, and Docker desktops is available in all those. And first and foremost, Docker desktop functionality for developers is exactly the same in the free tier and the personal tier as it is in the other tiers. And that's by design. We don't want to gate developers and their ability to create applications with our tool set behind a paywall. And so it's a great developer experience, same developer experience across all tiers. Also, the personal tier is, again, as I said earlier, the vast majority of developers are using that tier. So 80+% of the users out there, millions of developers, are experiencing Docker through that free personal tier. Then in the pro, team, and business, there's additional features in there for security, for visibility, for manageability, that are for the managers of development teams inside large organizations. And so it's not a paywall for developer-facing features, it's a paywall for manager-facing features, or security ops, SecOps-facing features. And so what that does is, you can see kind of on the upper right there, is that, okay, with those subscriptions, we can then invest in, recruit more developers that then put more value into Docker Desktop. What it also allows us to do, as you can see there on the lower left, is it allows us to continue to support the community and grow the community by investing in infrastructure in that community that the community is consuming. So 10 million registered developers, we support 35 million Docker engine downloads a month, 14 petabytes of container image storage, and 31 petabytes a month of network egress, all completely free, which is by design to support the growth in the community, growth of cloud native application development, and the growth of the developers that are building those great new applications. So I'm going to wind down here. Again, I just didn't want to make this too many slides. Just want to make a couple to set context and trigger further discussion. We do have community events coming up. Just want to give a quick shout out here. We have a community all hands this Thursday, March 31st, where we are going to be sharing new product releases. And so I'll tease with that. And if you're interested in what Docker is doing lately for developers, I encourage you to come to that. And then at DockerCon in May, is our big annual event. It's a 100% virtual event, so it's available to everyone around the world. For the last 2 years, we've had 80,000 developers, 80,000 participants in each of those last 2 years. We're expecting at least that this year. And in both these community events, it's very much developer, community. So I speak for as little as possible, and the rest of the talks are really focused on product roadmap, product releases, new product functionality, new features, and then developers from the community sharing with the rest of the community how they're using Docker to build different applications, MLAI Python apps, and Web3 crypto apps, and serverless functions. Like all the different types of applications you can build with Docker is really what we're highlighting at both of these events. Really encourage you to check them out. And last but not least, I just want to say thank you. I'm sure today here on this call, on this conference, that we've got many from the Docker community. I just want to say thank you, Docker developer community. We've been here for 9 years. We're celebrating our ninth birthday this March 2013. Solomon released Docker to the world. We want to be here for at least 9 more years, and the community is a huge part of ensuring that happens. And just want to say thank you for everything you've done for us, and we're looking forward to 9 more years. And that's it, Francesco. So I'm happy to open it up for Q&A, have a couple more points of discussion.
There we go. Now we have to decide, okay, so we want to remove that, but we can also leave the logo. Okay, yes, Scott, thank you. I'm also looking forward. I think last year I also streamed the DockerCon from my YouTube channel, so it was me like watching that. Probably I'll do this again this year, but let's see. And yes, so happy birthday to Docker. And what really surprises me is that, and also one of the reasons why I like, for example, to share Docker content on Twitter and social media, because is that we still have like basic questions like, I don't know, is there any VM inside Docker, for example? This is a kind of strange question. I was looking for the opposite, but I don't know if you look for something that if you want to give some thoughts here.
So in Docker Desktop, what we do is we do install a tiny VM in Mac case and in the Windows case. And that's because, as you all probably know, Mac and Windows don't have native Linux support. And so we install a tiny VM with a tiny Linux kernel in order for developers to use then Docker Desktop to build Linux containers in those environments. So the Docker engine itself does not have a VM in it, but the Docker engine is installed on a tiny VM inside Docker Desktop in order to allow developers to do Linux-based container development in both the Mac and the Windows environments. So hopefully that answers this question.
Yes, exactly. So let's see if we have something else. Yes, so in the meanwhile, while we wait, if we get another question, yes. So about the sorry. Do we have
why don't I take this question around Kubernetes and the Docker engine? So everyone here on the call, you may have been aware that there's been some notifications that Kubernetes, which originally was built to orchestrate and deploy containers on top of the Docker engine container runtime, is removing that dependency from the go forward Kubernetes distribution. And so I want to just clarify, because everyone's confused, like, oh, Docker is being taken out. No. So Docker has a runtime engine component inside the Docker engine called containerd. And right now, the Docker engine, when the Docker engine ships, containerd is actually under the covers, basically managing the container engine, the container image lifecycle. What the Kubernetes team decided is to simplify further, because Docker engine contains a container runtime, but it also contains build, it contains container distribution, it contains a lot of container lifecycle features that the Kubernetes team, in thinking about the Kubernetes use case, which is predominantly kind of large data centers of hundreds and thousands of clusters, that they wanted to simplify. They wanted to simplify that deployment. And so what the announcement is about is the Kubernetes stack going forward will use containerd, which is, as I said, a subset of the Docker engine functionality in its distribution going forward. But it doesn't, if you're a developer building Docker applications, it has zero impact on you, because the same image that you're creating on your Docker desktop on your laptop will run on Kubernetes that is deploying to Docker engines without change to the Kubernetes that is deploying to containerd, which is a subset of functionality of the Docker engine. So I know there's been a question in the community. I just want to upfront kind of clear that up, and I'm happy to take additional questions on that.
Yes, absolutely, and I think I missed that. Now we have this question, which is like in a cooking style, but it was more or less what we were talking about before. So maybe we can elaborate a bit more. By the way, it's from Nimrod Kramer, which is the daily.dev CEO. So I'd like you to meet each other one day. So he asks, what's your secret sauce or secret ingredient for building such an awesome community?
Well, I appreciate the question. I wish there was a single ingredient or silver bullet is another way to say it. And then thank you for the acknowledgement. Like we're very humbled. We're humbled that the community is so strong and so vibrant and so positive. I would point to two things, Nimrod, in answering your question. One is we've gone out of our way to culturally make the community very accessible to newcomers as well as experts. And that's by design because many of us, pre-Docker have been part of technical communities that may have been a ivory tower of experts and that weren't that necessarily welcoming to newcomers or didn't give newcomers a safe place to express their uncertainty or to express their kind of newbie questions. And I think you'll find wherever you go where there's a Docker community that you can be, a day one, day zero Docker user, and your questions, which you might be embarrassed to ask, don't be embarrassed. Like they'll eagerly answer them, eagerly support you on your journey. And that's been very intentional, is that we keep that accessibility, that friendliness as part of the community. And I think that's what enables it to grow because people see that they can come and be themselves and learn and become better as a result of participating versus fearfully approach a lot of experts that can be it can be a very intimidating technology. One of our company virtues is humility, and that is not just a company virtue, but it's a virtue that spreads into the community as well. And we just want to be accessible and friendly and humble and welcome everyone wherever they are in their journey of cloud native. So that's one. The second is, again, at the risk of overlaying it on too thick, is community leaders like Francesco and the Docker captains and the community leaders globally who are out there and passionate about Docker, passionate about sharing their learnings of Docker. That's the second point, which has really enabled the community to thrive, is that they see what's possible. They enjoy helping people. They see what's possible when developers adopt Docker to have what's possible in terms of benefiting their own lives, right? They're benefiting their own workflows, their own productivity, their own leveling up their own skill set. And our community leaders and captains generally enjoy teaching people and seeing that improvement. And so those are the two things I point to, Nimrod. Thank you for the question. Is just an approachable community that's friendly and accessible to anyone on their journey, and then a leadership in the captains and the community leaders that really, really are inspired by and passionate about helping others.
Yes, this is the reply. Make total sense. Thank you. Wish more companies were putting people first the same way Docker does. If one day we will meet in the same room, I'll pay for the pizza and the beers for everyone.
Excellent. Excellent.
Nice.
I look forward to that. I'll hold you to that.
Yes, nice. Maybe we have a question now from one of the other speakers, which is also, it's nice because the other speakers now, soon they will be on stage, but maybe he has a question. I think it was Amir, and he asks about Docker shim. This is a very technical one, but how Docker shim. So since I made a poll, like what's your expertise in Docker? This is like expert 6%, intermediate 21%, beginner 57%, and just no level 17%. So we please let's explain from the beginning. So how Docker shim removal influences.
Yeah, so this is it's another variation of what I was sharing before. So what Docker shim removal from Kubernetes means is that Kubernetes going forward, instead of using Docker Engine as its default runtime, container runtime, so instead of orchestrating and placing containers using Docker Engine, it'll place and route containers using containerd, which is a subset of the Docker Engine. So the shim removal is saying, okay, going forward, it's going to be containerd by default versus Docker Engine by default. But again, Docker Engine contains containerd, so it's from a developer standpoint, there's zero change in the developer experience.
Okay, now I have another fast question. How many times have you answered to this question?
Oh, the Docker shim question. If I had a nickel for each time I answered the Docker shim question in the last 6 months,
I don't know.
I'd be retired. I'd be retired by now.
I don't know. I'm tired, Scott, because I think
it's okay.
I think it's hundreds of times. So
it's okay.
It's nice. This is interesting. Is there a way to create Docker images without a Docker file? It's interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So we're actually exploring this with our upstream project called BuildKit. And BuildKit, there's actually some really interesting hacks that came out of hackathons, both our hackathon and external hackathons, where and you're gonna, again, I have not touched production code in about 20 years, so everyone's going to forgive me for being a little loose on technical details, but it allows you to programmatically drive BuildKit to programmatically create the layers of a Docker image. And so it's a really interesting venue that the community is exploring of like, okay, say you want to just automate the build of an image without the artifact of a Docker file, driving it right from BuildKit to create the images versus and sidestepping or completely stepping around the Docker file artifact a milestone or artifact midpoint is an interesting way to do that. So this is work in process, community. So like I wouldn't take this to production just yet, but if you're interested, like check out upstream BuildKit and some of the programmatic interfaces that are appearing on that, and different language wrappers and SDKs are coming out around that as well. Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. And just on top of that, you can check something which is called the Docker commit. So basically you can create an image out of a container. I don't know which was exactly the question, but you can also check that on the official documentation. So if you are curious, because Dockerfile is just a way to automate something that you can literally do this on the command line. It's not totally recommended, but it's doable. So check the Docker commit. Right. Okay. Nice. So I think, Scott, that we are running out of time. We have other questions, but I think that I'm super happy for this, let's say, our first collaboration. I think it's the first time that we're on a podcast. So you are one of the few people that I first met in person and then we made the podcast. Usually I do the opposite. Like I made some podcasts and then I met the person in real life. I met some of them in San Francisco. So yes, Scott, thank you so much again. Really, I usually say, I wish you good luck, but in your case, it's like multiplied by 10. No. And yes, so yes.
Really appreciate the chance to chat, Francesco, a chance to meet your community. Thank you so much for the invitation. Have a great rest of the show.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Scott. Bye. Okay, so let me invite. Okay, I invited the wrong person. Perfect. Okay. Hey, Dan, how are you? So now let's. Okay, perfect. Okay. So Idan Kinory, I don't know if I pronounced that well, but now we'll talk about environment configuration best practices. So would you like to introduce yourself just a couple of minutes, and then I'll let you start the talk, Idan. How are you?
Sure, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. So
nice.
So I'm Idan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry.
Awesome. So I'm Idan, and I'm a senior software engineer at Velocity. In the last couple of years, I'm working close to the area of DevOps and infrastructure, and I'm super excited about cloud. We're a big fan of daily.dev, so thanks for having.
Thank you.
Awesome. My free time, I like to work out. I'm also a big sports fan. Basketball.
Nice. I've been a volleyball coach for 20 years. So before stepping into tech. So if you say sport, the word sport, you are already my friend. I've also the daily.dev t-shirt. Let me show it. Okay, perfect. We can send you one if you are a fan.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay, so I think that we can start. So as I said before, it will be like a 20 minutes talk, 20-25, depends. And then I'll collect some questions that then we can propose at the end of the talk. Is this okay? Are you sharing your screen? I don't think so. So if you share your screen, I'll start sharing that, and then I disappear. Love Idan's t-shirt. But Ido, I have the daily.dev one. And you say that you love Idan's t-shirt. Okay, perfect. Good luck, Idan. Bye.
Awesome. So hey everyone, super excited to have this talk. And thanks again for daily.dev. I'm a big fan. So today's talk will be about environment configuration best practices. So let's get started. Cool. So as I mentioned before, so I'm Idan, and I'm a senior software engineer at Velocity. I'm a big sports fan, and in the last couple of years, I'm working close to the area of DevOps and infrastructure. Super excited about cloud and cloud products. As I mentioned, I work at Velocity. our mission in Velocity is to increase developers' productivity by creating on-demand production-like environments. As part of the work in Velocity, we had the chance to view a large number of configuration files for production application. And today's talk will be to share with you some of the insights and best practices we learned as part of this work. So let's take let's look from the bird's eye view and take a step back and discuss on some of the environment setups that are common in the industry that we saw after discussing with many companies. So let's start from the beginning. Public cloud infrastructure came into our lives with a big promise: to have on-demand infrastructure with a click of a button. That's together with CI/CD, which is a super common practice today on most of the engineering teams, leads to the fact that we ship new code to production on a daily basis, even multiple times a day. And of course, the scale just getting bigger and bigger. In order to support this scale, we need to make sure we have the correct environment set up for our developers. So after speaking and discussing with many companies on the industry, we would like to share some of the common setups that we saw in the industry. So a first environment setup would be shared environments. Developers would work locally on their own machine. They can code a feature or a bug fix. And of course, they would test their code. At some point, this won't be possible anymore. It can be from a variety of reasons. For example, lack of compute resources. At this point, they would probably offload some of the microservices to a shared environment and continue the software development lifecycle. The advantages of using this approach is that you have a fixed number of environments. You can maybe share an environment per team or maybe per group. So you have a fixed number of environments, which is much easier for maintenance. The problem here is that the environment is shared between your team or your group. That means that developers can override each other's work and push new feature on top of the other developers' work. So this is the first setup that we saw. The goal as R&D leaders would be to have on-demand environments for developers. We would like each developer to be able to provision an environment when they need one. Maybe work and test the new code, then commit the changes and push them to the version control, and eventually delete the environment and of course the workflow just coming back. We imagine a scenario similar to this, and we saw this setup in many companies in the industry that provided their own solution or a Velocity solution. We imagine a scenario similar to this. Each developer will have its own environment, which is similar to production, where they can code a new feature or bug fix and then deploy it to the actual production environment. With this setup, developers can work in isolated fashion, and of course, they can collaborate on the same feature. Imagine a front-end and a back-end engineer working together. So in order to support this setup, because in this setup you have a large number of environments, we need to follow some best practices to make it work. So in this talk, I prepared 3 best practices that we learned doing the work, and I would like to discuss it a bit. Just before we move on to the best practices, I would like to mention the 12-factor app. So for any of you not familiar with the 12-factor app, it's basically a set of best practices that are designed for writing software as a service application. Following these best practices will help you build a scalable application architecture, which is super important nowadays. This approach can be applied to any programming language and, of course, to any application. And all the tips that I will cover in a minute follows this 12-factor app. Awesome. So I prepared 3 tips for you. The first one would be to use environment variables. The second is decouple the configuration retrieval from the underlying application. And for all the front-end fans in the crowd, will be to use runtime environment variables for your React application. Cool, so let's start from number one. Environment variables. So I'm pretty sure that at some point in your career, guys, you had a chance to view one of these examples. Let's go over it a bit. So on the top left, we have an example of a hard-coded URL inside the application code before we use it to call the HTTP request. On the middle, we have a hard-coded access key and secret key, which besides the configuration issue that we'll talk in a bit, this is also a problem security-wise. And on the right, on the bottom, we have a variable called S3 bucket name that its value being determined according to the env type. On local, you get one value, and on dev environment, you get a different value. So what's the problem with this setup? In the world of on-demand environments, this won't scale. Imagine you need to control these values across many number of environments. That becomes a big problem, and it won't scale. Furthermore, this is also a potential issue for production issue. Imagine a scenario when you work on your local machine and you define the URL on the first example to your local host, and then by accident, you just commit it and push it to production. And now your production application have downtime. And of course, all of these examples violates the 12 app best practices, which specify that you need to have a complete isolation between the application configuration and the application code. So how would you know whether a specific value should be defined as a constant inside your code or whether it be externalized through environment variable? So my advice to you is to ask yourself this question: why do I need to change in my application when I want to deploy it to a different environment? For example, if I work on my local machine and then I would like to deploy my application code to dev or production, how many changes do I need to make? If the answer to this question would be many changes, then it means you have to rethink on decoupling the configuration from the code. And all of these points basically leads me to the point, which is to unlock the full potential of on-demand environments. Environment-specific config need to be externalized, for example, through environment variables. So a few benefits of using environment variables. So the first one, as I mentioned earlier, it helps you to externally manage your application configuration. You can load a different configuration per environment. The second one is security. You get a secret rotation, and of course, you don't store any sensitive information in your version control. And third, it's less production errors. I'm sure you all heard stories about a customer getting a wrong email by accident or notification because one of the developers was working on a testing environment with production configuration. Cool. So this leads me to my second tip of the presentation, which is decouple the configuration retrieval from the underlying application. So configuration can be stored in a variety of ways. For all the Kubernetes fans in the crowd, you can use config maps or secrets. There's also a solution by HashiCorp, which is called Vault. And of course, all the cloud providers have their own solution for that. The problem starts when we need to fetch the configuration from the third party into our application. So a common scenario that I have seen a few times would be a server-side application that as part of the server startup, fetches the configuration from the third party and passes the value to the application. If we look at the example on the bottom, imagine a Python server that is part of the server startup, uses in this case AWS SSM, fetches the configuration and pass the values to the application. So what's the issue with that? The first one, it creates a tight coupling with the underlying infrastructure. You basically always have to use third party to load the configuration. This is a scenario that we might want to avoid in some cases. For example, if I work on my local machine, I might want to use environment variables, load the environment variables from a .env file. And if I work in production, I might want to use a specific third party. And decoupling the configuration from the application help you do just this. And the second issue here is that it's basically an extra code that you need to write and maintain, which is not part of your application logic. It could contain bugs and maybe unwanted behavior that you don't expect to have. So one common solution to overcome this problem for the Kubernetes fans in the crowd would be to use init containers. For any of you not familiar with init containers, this is basically a set of containers that runs before your application container starts. You can use them to do a variety of tasks. For example, you can register a pod or remote server. You can fetch a GitHub repository and to a specific volume. And of course, you can use it, as in our case, to fetch the configuration from the third party and pass the values to our application container. So I would like to share with you a cool open source project that helps you do just this. Kubescape Init is an open source project for cloud secret injections. It supports both AWS and GCP managed services and help you overcome the problem that I discussed before. So how it works. If you check out this example on the screen, I have an environment variable called myAPI-key, and I compare it to the cloud identifier, in this case, the AWS ARN. The Kubescape Init project knows to replace the identifier with the exact value from the third party. And the coolest thing about this project is that it basically uses a Kubernetes native approach. It uses a native init container, as I discussed earlier, and something called admission webhook. I won't go into the details exactly what the admission webhook is, but in one line, this is basically a Kubernetes mechanism that help you do some kind of actions before a pod is created. And it's super useful in this case. Well, I put the GitHub link on the slide, so you can go check it out later. It's a super cool project. And of course, for any of you who work with HashiCorp Vault, there's also a similar solution to support that. So I recommend you to check it out as well. Awesome. And this basically leads me to the third point of my presentation. It will be runtime environment variables for your React application. So Create React App is a simple environment for creating a single-page React application. Officially, the environment variables are embedded during the build time in this case. That means that if you want to change the environment variables, it requires a build. In the case of on-demand environments, a build per environment is required. So if we discuss on-demand environments, this setup won't scale if you need to change the values multiple times. So what do we want to achieve? We want to be able to run a React application as a Docker container that is built only once. If you check out this example, where I put here a Docker Compose example, I have a React application, an environment variable called API URL, and I can control this variable externally from the application, which is super useful. So one common solution that we have seen a few times working in some companies in the industry is to bundle a JavaScript configuration file into the index.html as a script tag, as the example on the top. Before we start the container, we can read the environment variables within the container, and using some bash script, we can inject the values to the configuration file. Then the values are assigned to the global window object of the application, and which makes them available across your application. This solution is super flexible and basically helps you inject environment variables externally from the application. One disclaimer is that you shouldn't inject any secrets. All the values are visible by inspecting your application code. And I even say furthermore that this solution is super flexible, but it has its trade-off. So I really recommend you guys check it out a bit more before just going into production. Awesome. So we almost reached to the end of the presentation. I just want to recap a few key takeaways. So the first one would be to use environment variables in your application. Super useful. The second would be to decouple the configuration retrieval from the underlying application. There's many options to do that. We discussed one in the presentation. And consider injecting environment variables on runtime. And of course, don't forget to smile. Managing environment is a hard task and requires a lot of work. Cool. So thank you, guys. I had so much fun. I put here my email. So if you want to reach out after the talk and have some question, feel free. Back to you.
Perfect. And then I leave your email another couple of seconds so people can note that down. We have some questions already, so I think we can just stop on that. By the way, congratulations. I really loved the 12-factor app mention because I think it's about the basics. You also reminded me that I have to create something on that, but I appreciate that. And okay, so I think we can start. We have at least one question, and of course feel free to drop them. We have 5 to 10 minutes. Let me stop this. Perfect. So hey, well, Gapsi, how do you pass the variables from init container to another container without kube secrets in it? Do you use them? You store them in a volume?
So that is a good question. There's a variety of ways doing it. I really recommend to check the open source project around this area, Kubescape Init, and there's some other open source project. They did already the heavy lifting for you. So I really recommend taking something from the shelf and embed it to your application because there are many good solutions out there in the market. So this is my recommendation for you.
Nice. Okay, so I don't think there are other questions. No, I think he's just talking about his expertise. So we have people on different levels of expertise. So if you have anything to ask, but to be honest, I love also the level because it goes basically from basic to, let's say, intermediate advanced at the end. But to be honest, I really appreciate that. Congratulations for the talk. And yes, okay, so I think that there are no other questions. So I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit more or give maybe final message for this talk and speech. And thank you so much, Idan, for this.
Awesome. I just want to say that I had so much fun, and I'm a big fan of Daily.dev, and thank you, Francisco. And of course, if you guys put my email on the screen, if you have any question, feel free. I'll try to help as much as possible. It was awesome. Thanks.
Perfect. So we don't have any more questions, but we have some appreciation messages. So let me just show them. To be honest, there are too many, because also during the presentation, I don't want to confuse you, but we had some of them. I like YAML. There are some controversials. Some people hate them. For example, honestly, I don't. There are things that I hate more. I can say it's like politics. There are things that I hate more than that. So
I agree.
So yes.
I agree.
Nice. Perfect. Okay. So Idan, thank you so much. And yes,
Thank you very much.
Good luck. It was great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
We have another. Yeah. Thank you, Idan. Just the last compliment. Thank you, Idan. Very informative, John. Okay. Nice. Perfect. Okay. Let me remove and add. Okay. So first I have to remove and then add, because otherwise I mess them up. So Amir Kaushansky.
Exactly.
Kaushansky. Okay, I made this almost correct. So, okay, so welcome, and so what will be your talk about, and how are you?
I'm doing great. It was very, very interesting sitting here and hearing the other talks. Actually, it comes directly. They kind of made the road to my presentation because Docker, Kubernetes. We talked about Kubernetes a little bit, and then Idan, when he talked about environment variables, then he talked about secrets, and I will talk about best practices to secure Kubernetes, which involved all these parts all together. So without further ado, let me present my slides.
Absolutely, and this is an example of how, for example, we are organizing this daily.dev, the monthly dev. Now we have a theme, and it seems that it's working better for us, because at least we are focused on a topic. And so it seems that it's working better for us. So I'm happy that we have prepared the way for you. So super happy out of that. Okay, so you have basically 20-25 minutes, and then we have some questions at the end. So yeah, good luck, Amir. And yes,
thank you very much.
Talk to you later. Bye.
So that's me, Amir Kaushansky. I'm the VP product at Armo. I have a bachelor degree in computer science, and then I did the MBA finance. I'm doing cybersecurity for the past 20 plus years, and product management for the last 14 más o menos years. I was working in total for 8 years for Checkpoint and other companies, and in the last 2 years, I'm working for Armo, where we do Kubernetes security. And when I was asked to, so when we talk about Kubernetes in general, we need to think about the ecosystem of Kubernetes. We have the source control on one side. Then everyone is using, most of the people that I know, when they talk about Kubernetes, they use some kind of CI/CD DevOps pipeline, where at the end of it or in the middle of it, they ship containers to a registry. Since Scott was here, I put the Docker registry, but it can be any other registry. And then at the end of the day, they ship containers to a Kubernetes environment. It can be managed, unmanaged, dev, prod, staging, whatever. But that's the ecosystem that we are trying to protect. And I will touch when, at which stage we need to protect it, and what we can and should do in each one of these stages. So when I was asked to join this webinar, I thought about a nice topic that I can share with people that I care about. And then my thought was to create this list, the 10 things that I personally would do to secure my personal Kubernetes cluster. It's sorted by priority. You don't need to do all 10. Probably there are more things that you can do, but I think this is a good start. So, if you're new to Kubernetes, if you're starting with it, Kubernetes is not secure by default. Start with these steps and evolve during the way. So let's start. First of all, you need to scan your manifest files. You create the Kubernetes manifest files. Start scanning as soon as possible from your source control, then move to your CI/CD pipeline, and at the end, watch for things that are happening in your cluster. You need to choose the right controls and frameworks that you're scanning at each one of the stages. Some things are not relevant when you write a YAML file for your application, and some things are very, very relevant when you're running a cluster, a full-fledged cluster. So my advice to you is decide which controls, which tests should be running at each one of these stages, create it, make sure that people are working according to these guidelines, and make sure that when they deliver their work, they all pass these controls and tests. And once you have these findings that are coming from the scanner that you're using, make sure that you go through each one of these findings and then decide if something is okay, it is supposed to be privileged, for example, then approve it, make sure that you put it in some kind of exception or a I know list, and if not, then fix it. Make sure that it is fixed in your infrastructure as code, and this issue will not come back. The second thing I would have done is to protect my container images. And then I would do it on the container registry itself and on a cluster, a full-fledged cluster. Make sure that you have a policy for from where you pull container images. Make sure that your developers are not downloading arbitrary containers from different sources. Make sure that you define a threshold in each one of these stages on the pipeline, as well as on your cluster, whether it's staging or dev or prod. Define what is the threshold that you're willing to accept in the number and the severity of the vulnerabilities. And then make sure that you're constantly scanning these containers, and you're aware of the risk, and you're patching them. Make sure that problems are being patched, because if you will not do it, probably someone will exploit it, and then it's a pity. Scan your API server, scan your worker nodes. Make sure, even if it's managed or unmanaged Kubernetes, make sure that it is scanned. Make sure that your etcd settings are okay, that you have audit log enabled, RBAC, and other things that might sound, it's there out of the box, but maybe someone changed your configuration and now you're not encrypting etcd or something like that. So you need to make sure that the configuration is all right. And Kubernetes has a lot of configuration parameters, so you need to make sure that they are configured properly. Then you need to scan your worker node. You need to make sure that your worker nodes are okay. Check your kubelet settings and configuration. Make sure that your operating system is okay and you don't have any vulnerability in them. And then make sure that the container runtime is okay and it is configured properly. We just released today a blog about the recent vulnerability in containerd. You should make sure that you're not vulnerable to this vulnerability. I recommend people to collect the audit log and analyze the Kubernetes audit log. Basically, a Kubernetes API server logs every activity, or has the ability to log any activity that is created by any subject, whether it's a user, a group, or a workload. The API server basically has a policy file to define which level of auditing should be done. I can tell you that my recommendation to you is not to keep the logs on the API server. You need to stream them to a third-party solution. And then my recommendation is to analyze these logs and to have a solution that looks for things like login attempts or failed login attempts, because someone might be trying to connect or create something on your Kubernetes cluster. Look for error messages. Maybe someone is trying to call APIs that are not there. And then look for the anonymous user activity if you allow anonymous user to do something. There are other things that you can test, and there are many solutions out there in the market that are doing audit log analysis, but this is something very, very important, and it's a low-hanging fruit for you. You need to define detection rules and look for anomalous activities inside this data. The detection rules can be like, if someone runs a cluster in zone A and he sees a connection to a location which is the first time that the connection is created, or it's a malicious IP address, then you can identify it from these logs. The next thing I would have done is to apply list privileges. So I don't know if you know the Kubernetes role-based access control. Basically, it's something that you need to turn on in your cluster. Kubernetes has this, I think it's a complex structure where you have a role, and then the role has capabilities. It's called verbs, and the verbs are allowed on resources, on specific Kubernetes resources. And then you have a role binding that connects the role to the subject, and the subject can be service account, a user, or a group. And then the service account can be connected to a workload. So it's a little bit complex. And then you have a cluster role and a namespace role. And managing everything and understanding everything is quite complex. But my tips to you when it comes to role-based access control are the following. So first of all, there is something in Kubernetes called anonymous user and unauthenticated group. Make sure that they don't have any capability. If they do, anyone can connect to your cluster and do whatever they can do. Make sure that your workload doesn't mount service account by default. This is the default in Kubernetes. Every workload mounts a service account. Make sure that it's set to false. Make sure that in each namespace there is something which is called default service account. Make sure that it doesn't have any capability, because if it does, and you forgot to set the automatic service account token mounting, then probably every workload will have this capability. Then monitor and approve privileged users. For example, Kubernetes has the cluster admin role, which is connected in many cases to different users and groups. Make sure that you approve these users, and this is just an example, but you need to monitor the privileged capabilities in Kubernetes. You need to make sure that you know these users, you know these service accounts, and then you approve them one by one, and then you monitor the drifts, the new people, the new workloads that are being added to these privileged roles. Make sure that when you delete a solution, you installed, Argo CD, you played with it, you decided to remove it. I don't know why, because it's a great product, but let's say that you decided to do that. Then make sure that you clean all the service account and roles that are there, because they will stay there forever if you don't delete them. And then for the advanced users, you can look at whatever you give the users in their role-based access control settings versus what they consume from the audit log that I just mentioned in the previous recommendation. Yes, the next thing is to harden your Kubernetes cluster. So you have a Kubernetes cluster. It is composed of the worker node and the API server, which has behind it etcd. So one of the things, the basic things, is to make sure that nothing is accessible from the internet, especially your worker nodes. Make sure that no one can access them from the internet. Then make sure that all the communication between the different components is behind some kind of a firewall and has an access control. So for example, make sure that only the API server can talk to etcd, and the worker node can only talk with your API server, and no one else can go and interfere in the middle. If you have different clusters, make sure that they cannot communicate with one another. Make sure that your etcd is encrypted, and make sure that all the communication between kubelet and API server is encrypted. And then make sure that kubelet anonymous login is off, because if it's on, then good luck. Make sure that you're hardening your workload runtime settings. Don't run privileged containers. In some cases, you must run privileged containers, but try to refrain from it. Make sure that privilege escalation is false. The default in Kubernetes is that privilege escalation is allowed. Make sure that you set it to false in your manifest files, your deployment, stateful set, whatever manifest files. Make sure that the user that is running your processes in the group are more than 1,000. You can set it in the security context. Set limits, CPU and memory. It's very, very important. If someone breaks into your container, he's still bounded to whatever you set here. Don't give any special capabilities, Linux capabilities, like a capsysadmin. Sometimes we tend to forget that we ran debug and we had to use networking, and we leave it in the manifest file. So remember, you need to go and remove it when you go to production. Because if you don't, then the attacker will use it once he enters your container. And then use AppArmor or SE Linux when it is available. When we talk about Kubernetes in general, one of the things that I learned during my career as a security practitioner, I knew that security is being mandated by the security team. However, here, when we talk about Kubernetes, which I always refer to as cloud on steroids, we have two personas. One is the DevOps, and the other one is security. In some cases, they combine them to something like DevSecOps, and sometimes it's a security architect in the cloud team. But there is a knowledge and a knowledge gap and capabilities gap between these two. The security practitioner knows a lot about security, but he doesn't know a lot about Kubernetes and the capabilities in Kubernetes. Speed is very important because DevOps wants to run fast. They want to make sure that business gets whatever they need. So speed is super important, and you can't have security as a choke point because that will kill the speed, right? So what I suggest that security and DevOps will sit together, define guardrails. Whatever is mandatory in the organization. It can be things like, the images in production must be scanned, or I allow only pulling images from ECR, or every workload must have a owner label in the labels section, etc., etc. Make sure that these guardrails are being enforced from dev to production. So, fail the pipeline if these guardrails fail, or fail the commit if this guardrail fails. And make sure that everyone is following that in your organization. The next thing is network segmentation. I talked a lot about network, and you can see some blogs that I did a year ago on our website. Basically, Kubernetes networking is flat. The Kubernetes network policy is being enforced by the CNI plugin. So you need to make sure that your CNI plugin has the ability to enforce policy. Actually, not always by the CNI plugin, but to the majority of the cases it is. You have an ingress and egress capability. This is very important for east-west, because if you define ingress from one pod, then you need to make sure that it's defined as egress on the other pod. It will not work any other way. It's allowed only policy, so no drops, no logs, no FQDNs, and then it's CIDR based, meaning that you can define an IP address or a range of IP addresses. You have pod selection, that you can decide which pods can communicate with the others, and of course you have the ability to set ports. So make sure that you understand the network, that you can visualize it, that you can see who talks with whom, not only inside the cluster, but also outside the cluster, and things that are coming to your cluster. Look for indication of compromise. So look at IP reputation, at who is contacting you, but also who you are contacting to, and try to find abnormal activities in these logs. Then define network policy. So network policy, it's great in Kubernetes, but you need to make sure that your network policy can deal with the constant changes, because Kubernetes and clusters are, they change really, really fast, and you don't want to break your application, and there are no logs. So try to find something that works for you. The last thing is related to Idan's talk. Make sure that you don't put secrets like tokens, keys, and passwords in your manifests and artifacts. Use Kubernetes secrets if it's possible, because it's the easiest way to share secrets with your workload. It's not secure. It's only base 64 that any script kiddie can go and open. So my advice is to use some kind of key management system, either cloud or a third party that is good for you. So, with that, these are my 10 recommendations for securing Kubernetes. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm working for Armo. We created a Kubernetes security product, which is totally open source, and we build it in the mindset of developers. The product is called Kubescape, and it is one of the fastest growing Kubernetes security projects. You can see it here in red. We have 5.4 K Git stars, and we have a large community, and you can see the link here. And we actually have, it's basically a single pane of glass that gives you all the capabilities. You can manage multiple clusters in multiple stages of your software development lifecycle. We have RBAC visualizer, we have image scanning, we scan your workloads with different tests, we call it controls, etc., etc. So go try it. And you can see here that we have the ability to scan code. We have a VS Code extension. We can integrate your CI/CD in different stages with different tools, and then we can scan your clusters, dev, prod, or staging. And we always like contributors. So we're not as big as Docker. I wish we were, but if you want to contribute to a cool project, then you're more than welcome. And Francesco, I think I did to the point, like 20 minutes, right? You gave me 20 minutes and I was
Perfect.
to the point.
Perfect. I really, really enjoyed this talk. I think that you You brought a very high quality. This is my personal opinion, of course.
Thank you.
Yes, just one question before we go on. We have at least two good questions.
Okay.
Usually, when you have two, then they start dropping like crazy. But I see, is the article called like CVE 2022-23648 arbitrary host file access? Is that the blog post you were talking about? I'm not sure. By Leonid Sandler.
Yeah. It's so actually I don't remember the CVE number. You will have to excuse me. But there is a CV on Container D that was released at the beginning of the month.
Okay.
I mean, they patched it at the beginning of the month. Exactly. It's this one.
Okay. I see.
I can tell you that my GKE environment is still vulnerable.
Okay. But I think that this is pretty recent. So let's don't lose time, and we have at least two. Okay, let's start with this one. Okay, so maybe I can remove this. Just a second. Okay, so you have the slides. Let me remove this. Okay, let's go back here. So about logging. Logging is always a problem. If you know the 12-factor app, you probably there is also some best practices there. So is there any third-party services that summarize the activity log? Or do we only catch the gate log, or everything? What do you think?
So there are many solutions. Most of the commercial solutions, if you go to things like Datadog, Rapid7, Palo Alto, all these solutions, probably they analyze logs and the audit logs. They probably analyze audit logs. We are going to add it to Kubescape in the next quarter. So it's going to be free and it's going to be out there. We do believe in open source, so probably we will start with something small, like small detection rules. And then, of course, we ask the community to come and tell us what they need and contribute themselves, to add more capabilities that will give value to other users, right? This is what the community is for.
Nice. I love this answer. Now that I think you replied to this like hundreds of times, but let's go with this one because I think it's important. So when creating a cluster, when should I create the security layer? So basically, when would you start?
After you're being hacked. So after they hack you and they steal your data, then you need to secure. No, I'm kidding. Of course, I'm kidding.
I love this one.
You need to start. I mean, usually most of the companies, they start to think about security after they're being breached or someone else next to them is being breached. But I do think that you need to start security from the beginning. This is why I created it with priority, because I do understand that security in most cases is considered as a curse, right? People, they see security, it's like going to the dentist or to the doctor, right? So we didn't want to do it in Kubescape. So you can go and try it yourself and see that it's easy, it's simple. You can start small in your with your development team, and then go to your pipeline, and you start with a small list of tests, and then you grow them as you get the confidence. But definitely, Kubernetes is not secure. Okay? By default, it's not secure. It's a great product. I love Kubernetes. Okay, it's a great product. It can be secure, but you need to know what you're doing, and that's the hard part. So you need to start from the beginning, and don't wait till you have a cluster and then apply security on top of it.
And to be honest, I love this reply. Of course, it depends. If you're just doing the first hello world in Kubernetes, maybe you are not thinking about security. We are talking about production environments, of course. So
no, but maybe if you play with hello world application, you need to start and understand the deployment. You need to start, do I need a service account? What is a service account? Why do I need in my hello world a workload a service account? Why do I need to give it, a cluster admin? And then,
yeah, yes, absolutely. So maybe you can have a better understanding if we turn this question, it's like when should I start locking the door of my house? So it's basically you have a similar reply.
Yeah.
Nice. I love this one. Okay, so another one about by Gloven about the set limit of CPU memory. So how do we know if the limit is good enough for the apps? How can we measure it?
That's above my level. But I think that if you go to and do kubectl logs, you will probably see insufficient memory or insufficient resources in your logs, in your workload logs, and then you need to increase it. By the way, when you set a limit, there is in Kubernetes, which is really, really cool. You can ask for minimum X and maximum Y. So you can use these two boundaries, and you don't need to be exactly. You don't need to put the limit to be 1. You can say it's 1, but I want it to grow to up to 2. Okay. So I think that just look at the workload logs and analyze it from there. There is no other way to understand that or know that.
Yeah, and I think this is a matter of practice, and this is not as simple. And we wish that we had like just a one line solution, and then we can go to bed and sleep.
Maybe it's a good idea for a startup.
Yes. Who knows? So before going go, maybe one of the last questions. Let me drop some good compliments and good and deserved compliments, I can say. So great talk, great session, really great event. Thanks a lot. Great talk, Amir. We have random questions. Does Kubescape apply to cloud platforms only or on-premises?
It applies to everything which is Kubernetes. So as long as it's Kubernetes, we don't care about if it's managed or unmanaged. It just works. We love Kubernetes. So
yes,
that's the main idea.
Mm-hmm. Yes, maybe this will be the last question. So we are starting to wrap this up. And do you think that sealed secrets is a good way to store sensitive data in a Git repo?
Can you elaborate on sealed secrets?
I don't know. I can't help here. Sealed secrets.
I can tell you that we played with an idea of like encrypting the secrets before you put them to Kubernetes secrets. That's a really, really good practice. But then you need to think about how you distribute the keys, the encryption keys, to decrypt the secret to different workloads. It's called the secret zero problem. You can read about that because at the end of the day, it's like a recursive problem. If you protect the secret with another secret, how do you protect the second secret with a third secret? And then it goes on and on and on and on. We do have some kind of solution, but it's beyond the scope of this session. It requires a dedicated session. If you invite me again to talk about it, you need to. I'm not taking pizza or beer. Only cannoli. Okay, espresso and cannelloni.
This is a good choice. It's a very good choice. I see that you are an expert also there. So, so thank you. The last comment, and then we'll start to wrap this up. Just for fun, I will tell a story in my company that we don't think security too much. Then now we are starting to migrate into Kubernetes. Yes. Okay, perfect. Amir, so I don't know if you would like to stay or I can say hi, but basically we are starting to wrap this up. I really enjoyed this event because I also stepped into the Docker community. I met these new people, so especially I love the you are going dark, so you are fading out. So this is like a and I like that. So let me share my screen, and if you want to stay, it's a pleasure. So the next event, it will be about developers and open source, and I think that also many projects, they also overlap because many of the projects that we talked about today, they are also open source. Maybe they are more focused on the DevOps, but Also, daily.dev was born as an open source project, so it's nice. It's not easy to start with an open source project, but we are trying to do this. We'll have, of course, other speakers. One day I'll invite you again, but sorry, not next time, Amir. I'm sorry, but yes, I really liked your talk, and I also think that yes, I also liked the order of the three talks. So we had like yours at the end, let's say a little bit more advanced, but I loved the quality of what we talked about. I hope that this has been helpful for you in the audience. If you want to stay updated about the upcoming events, you can just sign up on the pinned chat message, and that's it. This is all we have to say. Just let me remind that all these event is possible because of the amazing speakers, and also it's organized by daily.dev, which is a tool from developers to stay updated. So I really highly suggest you to take a look. And yes, we have we get feeds from different sources. Of course, DevOps is on the top of that, Docker and other container blog posts. So yes, I think that we are done for today. And for the first time, I'm closing almost perfect in time. So I'm getting better. This is my third episode as a host in this event. I'm super happy. And yes, Amir, thank you so much. And talk to you next time. I'll invite you soon. Ciao.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.